On December 7, 1941, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, killing 2,400 Americans and sending waves of panic throughout the United States. In response, President Franklin D. Roosevelt delivered his Day of Infamy speech, stating the United States was at peace with that nation, but the Japanese government has deliberately sought to deceive the United States by false statements and expressions of hope for continued peace. While his remarks united the nation in its entrance into World War II, they also caused suspicion and fear toward Japanese Americans. Roosevelt condemned Japan's attack, assuring the country that the American people and their righteous might will win through to absolute victory. By declaring the Japanese threat to national security, he fueled anti-Japanese sentiment in the American people.
I ask that the Congress declare that since the unprovoked and dastardly attack by Japan on Sunday, December 7th, 1941, a state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire.
Soldiers were deployed to locations of suspicion along the west coast and the Mexican border to stop any Japanese people from escaping. They also guarded entrances to every aircraft and munition plant, taking necessary precautions with machine guns ready with live ammunition. This heightened military state further inspired civilian suspicion and patriotic calls for action. The attack on Pearl Harbor was portrayed as unprovoked, and citizens were told that the Japanese government had intentionally tricked the U.S. into a sense of cordiality. In turn, Americans like C.R. Jobbers from Elon College, North Carolina, suggested placing defense factories in every area where Americanism is about 100%, like his, where only 0.6% of the community was of foreign descent, and therefore able to be trusted to guard against spies. However, the claim that the U.S. had not contributed to motivating the attack was not wholly accurate. In a protest against Japan's occupation of Manchuria, President Roosevelt had implemented the Export Control Act, restricting essential resources like oil to Japan. Japan had attempted to find a resolution, including its 14-point message, but a lack of diplomatic progress had provoked Japan to act. While Japan's violent escalation of the conflict was unjustified, President Roosevelt's inaccurate portrayal of Japan as an unprovoked aggressor fueled waves of nationalistic fury. Riding those waves, Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, authorizing the evacuation of Japanese Americans from military areas and the surrounding communities. Lieutenant General John L. DeWitt of the Western Defense Command began enforcing curfews and promoted voluntary evacuation measures. On March 29, 1942, 120,000 Japanese Americans were relocated to government-run detention camps without trial. Nearly 70,000 were American citizens. Many families suffered extreme losses, property alone at $1.3 billion, and total net income at $2.7 billion. These actions violated fundamental constitutional protections, particularly the Fifth and 14th Amendments, which guarantee due process and equal protection under the law. Thus, while Roosevelt's measures sought to protect the nation according to his presidential responsibility, they also contributed to a dangerous erosion of individual rights for the Japanese Americans, whose loyalty was unjustly questioned. Despite some never having lived in Japan, Japanese Americans were required to answer loyalty questionnaires. The infamous question number 28 asked Japanese Americans if they would swear unqualified allegiance to the United States of America and forswear any form of allegiance or obedience to the Japanese emperor. This question wrongfully implied that Asian Americans, despite their American citizenship, would place their loyalty according to their ethnic heritage. It also violated the 14th Amendment's guarantee of equal protection under the law, showing the government's failure to uphold its responsibility to the safety and equality of all its citizens, and reducing Japanese Americans to a foreign threat rather than recognizing them as fellow Americans. In the Densho oral histories, internment survivors expressed their frustration with the loyalty questionnaires, leading to their decision to protest unjust conditions and demand that their constitutional rights be respected. At Manzanar, a temporary internment camp, military police opened fire during the Manzanar riot in December 1942, killing 2 Japanese Americans and injuring many others. Yet, even after the violence, the government insisted it was acting in the interest of safety, justifying the internment as a matter of national security and for their own protection. Lieutenant General John D. Witt declared it to be a matter of military necessity to keep Japanese Americans in designated military areas to control and oversee their eventual evacuation and internment. The War Relocation Authority further stated that the camps would provide communities where detainees could work and contribute while waiting for reassimilation and employment. However, the justification for internment was not based on legitimate national security concerns, but on deeply rooted racial prejudice and wartime hysteria. While the Department of Justice was the authority who detained aliens truly found guilty of disloyalty, the War Relocation Authority interned individuals simply because of their race. The camps were said to be for their protection, but an internee highlighted the contradiction. If we were put there for our own protection, why were the guns at the guard towers pointed inward instead of outward? Personal testimonies reveal how this injustice left lasting scars. Marianne Takehara, interviewed by NJ Spotlight News 80 years later, recalls the injustice she felt despite being a child. We were just kids. We were American citizens, but we were treated like enemies. She described having to carry government issued tags and losing her father temporarily when he was arrested by the FBI without explanation. This injustice was further amplified by a mix of fear-inciting media and pre-existing racism. Public fear fueled by misinformation combined with pre-existing anti-Japanese sentiment to create an environment where discrimination was not only tolerated but actively encouraged. Propaganda compared them to animals, and terms like Japs were used as slurs. Japanese hunting licenses were even created and sold. Some public figures openly voiced hateful racist sentiment, like Idaho Governor Chase Clark, who stated Japs live like rats, breed like rats, and act like rats. Despite the hysteria, intelligence reports told a different story. Curtis Munson's investigation revealed that the threat of Japanese Americans was extremely exaggerated with no evidence of widespread disloyalty. And FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover also stated that mass internment was unnecessary. The Ringel report, commissioned by the Navy, concluded that the Japanese problem was exaggerated due to racial bias as well, and that those who posed the threat were already detained. Still, public opinion and officials like DeWitt used the lack of sabotage as evidence that sabotage was imminent, further fueling paranoia. There was also a clear double standard in treatment between ethnic groups that further exposed the racism that was driving the policy. On December 15, 1942, Attorney General Francis Biddle emphasized the democratic strength and unity of the U.S., noting that the 600,000 Italians are no longer alien enemies and have been released from that stigma en masse in a way no Axis nation has dared to match. Yet, he failed to mention the countless innocent Japanese American citizens still trapped in harsh isolation, revealing racial discrimination even within the larger group of perceived aliens. Legal resistance began to emerge in the face of such clear constitutional violations. Korematsu versus United States saw Fred Korematsu defy evacuation orders and challenge their legality. While the Supreme Court upheld his conviction in 1944, later evidence revealed that government officials had suppressed critical reports, showing there was no military necessity for the internment. In 1983, Korematsu's conviction was overturned in federal court, but the Supreme Court's original decision still stands. Other lawsuits followed, continuing the fight for injustice. Other legal cases, such as Oyama versus California, challenged discriminatory policies like the Alien Land Act. Eventually, in 1988, the U.S. government acknowledged its mistakes, issuing a formal apology and reparations under Public Law 100-283. The legacy of internment serves as a lesson in how fear can erode democracy. The policies implemented to control the overblown Japanese threat violated the constitutional rights of American citizens and lasted through generations, undermining the foundational values the United States swears to protect. This is a lesson that the U.S. has always struggled to learn, rising beyond racial bias and wartime paranoia to fulfill its responsibilities to both the nation and the rights of all its citizens. Similar sentiments arose toward people of Middle Eastern descent after September 11, 2001, showing how easily fear can overpower reason. Ultimately, the story of Japanese American incarceration reminds us that national security can never come at the expense of civil rights without weakening the very democracy it seeks to defend.